What's up, ladies and gentlemen of YouTube? Boogie2988 coming at you live as I get through the power of the internet. Right now, if you've been paying attention to YouTube or the media, it's the big thing to make fun of Rick and Morty fans. And I wanted to talk about that a little bit. This whole Szechuan sauce disaster and everything else. And I don't think a lot of people are going to like what I have to say. But I'm going to try to do it from the heart here. I'm going to try to do it without edits and just talk to you about this entire deal. First, I want to talk a little bit about the stuff that Dan Harmon said a couple of weeks ago on Twitter. He went on a Twitter rampage talking about how there was a certain subset of fans that were misogynistic and attacked the female writers that had created parts of this season. And Dan, with all due respect, I like you as a person and I love the stuff that you create. That said, I certainly hope that you are not confusing criticism with personal attacks, which is something we see a lot on YouTube. We see that a lot in the media. We see that a lot with creators. Criticism, I think, is always welcome, should always be welcome. If you don't like a particular episode of a show and you don't like the writer of it, I think it's okay to say, I didn't like that episode. I hope you can do better. I think it's okay to say this season, Dan, was not as good as season 1 and it was about as good as season 2. I think it's okay to say that. I think Dan knows that. I think most people who create stuff understand that. Though we can get very sensitive from time to time. Certainly we know I have. I think what Dan is talking about is the people who instead use personal attacks or doxing attempts or death threats or threats of any nature. Those are the people that I think Dan is talking about. He also identified straight white men as being one of the problems, straight white men who don't have much of an identity, and they feel that it's their job to protect the show because it belongs to them, because they... I don't know if I agree with any of that stuff. Certainly Dan is a straight white male himself, so certainly I don't think he meant it that way. Some people do, and I don't know why you would ever consider a subset of men or in general, like men in general, to be the problem or to be negative. I think many of us are open-minded. I think many of us are trying to learn, and many of us are trying to be better men. And I think whether we're straight or white has very little to do with it. But that said, if you took that remark personally, I did a little bit. I think for the most part, I think Dan knows better overall. So that said, the thing that we're seeing on YouTube right now is this whole Szechuan sauce thing and how a certain subset of the Rick and Morty fan base are bad fans. And I want to talk about bad fans for a second here, because I think I'm probably a bad fan of Rick and Morty, and I'll explain why. I read an article on some publication linked on Reddit, I think the Rick and Morty subreddit linked to it, and talked about how there were a very obnoxious group of bad fans in the Rick and Morty fandom. It's certainly some of the ones who dress and cosplay and things along that lines, I think, is one of the subgroups. The ones that gatekeep, those are another subgroup. We'll talk about that in greater detail. But they used a few examples in that article, and it really got me thinking about myself. And whether or not I'm a bad fan of Rick and Morty, especially because I'm a straight white male. They said that some people tune into Breaking Bad, and most of us recoil in horror as we watch Walt become a monster. But some people tune in because they like to watch Walt take over the meth trade. And I'll tell you something, that was one of my favorite aspects of the show. I loved watching him be a monster. It was really fun for me. I also recoiled in horror, don't get me wrong, but I also kind of rooted him on a little bit as the monster that he was. I kind of liked part of that. They also said in The Sopranos, some people tuned in to watch Tony grow as a person and how he interacted with his family. But some of us tuned in just because we love to watch the mafia whack other people, and that made us bad fans. And I'll tell you something, I loved never knowing who was going to get killed in that show and who was the next one up to bat. And they were horrific and awful, and they disgusted me, and I loved every second of it. And if there were more people killed in that show, I would have liked it even more. I promise you I would. And some of us like Rick and Morty, not because we identify with the family or identify with the people he affects, but we identify with Rick. And I am a nihilist. I am. And I have been I've been a pretty crappy person in the past. And I relate to Rick's nihilism, and I relate to his difficulty with connecting with other people. And it's one of the reasons I love the show. So I think that by that writer's definition makes me a bad fan of Rick and Morty. And I don't know how Dan or Justin or anybody else would feel about that. I don't know. But here's what I say. I say every time someone like me pays for the season pass on my Xbox, you still get the money. And I think when somebody like me watches it on the Comedy Central website, it still counts as a download, and you still get the ad revenue. And I think when we watch it live on television, we still count for the ratings. So I don't know if there is such a thing as a bad fan as long as they're consuming the media, watching it, and paying for it. I think that's not a bad fan at all. And certainly they're still making you a successful person. And there's certainly a subset of people here on YouTube. You may not know this, but they don't tune in to watch me grow as a person. They don't watch to root me on, to see me be successful, to see me become a better person, or to shrink after the surgery and losing all this weight. They're here to watch, to root on my death. They're here to root on my failure. They're waiting for the day my wife leaves me. They're waiting for the day that I die of a heart attack. They're waiting for a day that my channel dies. And they leave terrible, awful criticisms, negative personal attacks even, on the comment sections from time to time. And I'm not particularly bothered by it because some of those people are your biggest fans. Some of your haters are the biggest fans. And, sometimes it only takes a small thing to turn them from hater to someone who really enjoys what you're doing. But either way, they're watching. Either way, they're watching. And I appreciate that. You've helped buy my house. You pay my mortgage. Thank you. Even if you are an obnoxious person. And I think that really leads to the biggest thing here. The people that I think are hurt most by all of these YouTube videos attacking the fan base. There are some people who, like me, growing up, were very socially awkward and had a lot of difficulty doing this stuff. And some of us, it might be because you're from an abusive home and you never really had the opportunity to socialize in a healthy environment. Or maybe you have a mental disorder that makes it very difficult, like I did with the anxiety stuff. Or maybe you have one of those syndromes or one of those diseases or one of those issues that make it difficult to communicate or make you unable to do that stuff. I don't want you to feel bad about this stuff. I used to feel bad about how socially awkward and obnoxious I could be and how offensive I could be growing up. I used to feel bad about it all the time, but I understand that there are certain circumstances that made it difficult for me to be the person that I wanted to be, the person that I like to think I am now. Don't let all of this negativity affect you in a negative way. I spoke with somebody at Retropalooza who asked me, I was asked on stage and then in a personal question, what I thought about Dan Harmon's comments and all that other stuff. And I talked about it at Retropalooza and said that I don't think there's such a thing as a bad fan and you shouldn't feel bad about it. And I certainly don't think there is for me. I don't consider any of you to be bad fans. Some of you are doing bad things, though. And I think some of that can be, I think when you are overly obnoxious about a fandom, bronies come to example. Some bronies gave that stuff a very bad rap. Most bronies I know were just generally normal, average people who enjoyed the content. They weren't obnoxious about it all, but some of us can be overly obnoxious about it. And when we are, we do create that kind of criticism. We allow people to criticize us as a fan base and they can attack us. And if you can't help that, that's understandable. If you don't know how to help that, that's understandable. But if you're of able, sound mind and body, you certainly shouldn't be doing that. You shouldn't be jumping up on counters at McDonald's demanding your Szechuan sauce if you can help it. And certainly never with the personal attacks, never with the doxing, never with the physical threats. Certainly never that. I know it's easy to love a thing, and it's easy to hate a thing. It's easier to hate a thing. But we have to do all of these things in moderation, and I think most of us know that. And I want to defend all the Rick and Morty fans who do know, and the ones who don't, I think you can learn, and I hope that you do. So that's my take on all of this stuff. If you like Szechuan sauce, you really want to get some, I think that's okay. I don't think it makes you a bad person. Just don't be an asshole while you're there trying to get it. Simple as that. And if you don't like this latest episode or latest season of Rick and Morty, I think it's okay to tell Dan that. I think it's okay to tweet about that. I think it's okay to talk about it without the death threats, without the personal attacks, without the bullshit. You can do better. If I can do better, and I was as lost as they come, I think. I was the 4chanter of the 4chanters in the pre-Boxy days. I really was. We'll talk about that sometime. But if I can do better, I know you can. Okay? So that said, guys, thanks for watching. I love you very much. I'll speak with you again soon. And, hey, Dan or Justin, if you ever see this, I'm sorry for being a big fan. I'm sorry for being a bad fan. But I like it when Rick's an asshole. If you didn't want me to like Rick being an asshole, you shouldn't have written such a likable asshole. Captain Hindsight there. See you guys.